You know, things just get crazy sometimes in this mixed up world that we live in, and a perfect example of that is what is going on in Canada. Now, we talked about before the trucker protests, we talked about why Justin Trudeau is so angry about the trucker protests, we talked about how it's actually becoming effective, and some of the restrictions related to coronavirus are actually breaking in Canada, and the trucker protest deserves a lot of credit for it. However, it doesn't mean everything is going well. We are now in a new level of authoritarian crackdown under the Trudeau regime, and we have to go over it because this has broader implications for Canada as a whole, and it just goes to show you that a lot of the conspiracy theorists, or the people who are called conspiracy theorists, did happen to be right, because Trudeau is basically implementing the Alex Jones what he warned about playbook in real time on our screens, and he's being backed up by the mainstream media. But before we get into that, we have a sponsor. It's a wonderful sponsor. We'll catch you on the other side of the ad read. Our health is incredibly important, and everybody knows that it's important. This is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to find good health information, good supplements, and what you should actually be doing. I know you guys have heard that eggs are bad, and then they're good again, and then they're bad again, and who knows where it's at right now, and don't even get me started on bread. This is one of the reasons why I like this product, C60 Evo. It's made from olive oil right here in the United States of America, because there's claims about what it does. I've taken it, and I felt the effects of what it does. And what those things are better energy in the morning. 1 teaspoon in the morning daily is what I'm on. And you don't get disrupted during your sleep like you do when you drink a bunch of coffee in order to get that burst of energy. And the great thing about this, the great thing about the products that are associated with me, is if you go to 360evo.com/AJW, then you can get 10% off a single order or 20% off a subscription order. Try it out. You'll like it. Made in America. Don't feel bad about buying it. C60evo.com.
In a democracy, you can protest. You can share your opinion at the top of your lungs. You can disagree with elected officials. You can certainly disagree with me. Small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing. In a democracy, you can protest. You can share your opinion at the top of your lungs. You can disagree with elected officials. You can certainly disagree with me.
If your truck is being used in these protests, your corporate accounts will be frozen. The insurance on your vehicle will be suspended. The consequences are real, and they will bite. It is time for you to go home.
In a democracy, you can protest. You can share your opinion at the top of your lungs. You can disagree with elected officials. You can certainly disagree with me.
And then finally, let me say, for anyone who is concerned that their accounts may have been frozen because of their participation in these illegal blockades and occupation, the way to get your account unfrozen is to stop being part of the blockade.
Small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing.
So when we last left off this story, we had mentioned that GoFundMe, the organization that raises funds allegedly for causes and totally doesn't have political biases, declared that the millions of dollars that were raised for the trucker convoy were actually going to be seized by the company and donated to the company's preferred causes. Now, fortunately, this was seen broadly as fraud, and a bunch of attorney generals from red states decided to go after them, so they backed off of this and said that they would be returning the funds. Now, this is considered a good compromise from where they were, which was stealing the funds and donating it to left-wing organizations, because GoFundMe is a left-wing company. But in reality, this is a terrible compromise, because the money should have went to the people that it was intended to go to, because GoFundMe is supposed to be a neutral fundraising platform. GoFundMe, weirdly, strangely, oddly, if you guys can actually believe it, appeared to have no such policy when it came to raising money for the Black Lives Matter rioters, whether that be to bail out rioters or to financially support them, and I honestly can't understand why GoFundMe, a tech company, would be inconsistent on these issues. But to be fair to GoFundMe, the Black Lives Matter riots actually had broad support from the political class in this nation and from major corporations. Kamala Harris very famously tweeted out links to the Minnesota Bail Fund to bail out rioters that were destroying the city of Minneapolis during the height of the Black Lives Matter riots. Other politicians did similar, and Black Lives Matter was being given money, basically chucked in their direction, by major corporations throughout this nation, and all they faced was some scrutiny, some criticism from people on the right wing. By contrast, Canada not messing around. Justin Trudeau has announced that they will be going after the people who are funding, providing gasoline, or any aid and comfort to the protesters, because Justin Trudeau is an authoritarian-style left-wing politician, and he wants to crush all opposition to him. And by the way, this is something, and credit where credit is due, that was taken note of back in 2014 when a man called Daniel Dickinson, or Daniel Dickens, I'm not sure if I could say that name on the internet.com, I'm not sure if I would get demonetized for that level of swearing, wrote an article about how Justin Trudeau was essentially a tyrant in the making in Canada as he was being brought into office in the prime ministership. A lot of people focus on the headline in this article and they don't really read into the nitty-gritty of it, but this article is really good at outlining the case for what we're seeing now, so we're going to go over it throughout the course of the video. And people get put off by the idea that Justin Trudeau could be a tyrant because he's so goofy. He likes to play dress up every time he goes to a certain place. There's Justin Trudeau dressing up when he went to meet people who are Indian, and there's been a bit of a controversy here and there about Trudeau doing this in what he calls cultural appreciation, but everybody else calls him wearing the most stereotypical garb of whatever ethnic group that he's going to meet when he's going to meet them. And of course, Justin Trudeau likes to dress up in other occasions, as he's been caught multiple different times not only doing blackface, but basically painting his whole entire body black, which just goes to show you that these left-wingers who are obsessed with anti-racism, they're obsessed with progressive politics, have all of these issues in themselves that they're trying to project onto other people so that way they don't feel as bad about their own actions. Now, with that being said, I do want to highlight certain portions of this article where this guy predicts that Justin Trudeau would become a dictator during the course of his administration in Canada, and I want to talk about the subheader first because it goes to show you how people saw what was coming before it happened based on his personality and his inclinations, and more importantly, his actions before taking the prime ministership. The leader of that party does what he wants when he wants, no one dares question him. Would Prime Minister Justin Trudeau arbitrarily whip up a vote and outlaw certain moral questions? Could Prime Minister Trudeau be trusted to make decisions for the good of the country, not just for his personal self-worth? Would Trudeau call in the police to enforce his vision? Let's hope we never have the opportunity to ask those questions. Now, unfortunately, we did get to the point where we have to answer those questions, and to all of those points, the answer is a 100% astounding yes. So one of the things that's highlighted by this article is that Justin Trudeau has praised on multiple occasions in serious, non-sarcastic ways the Chinese system and talked about his admiration for their style of government. And it's not just praise, it's not just words.
Even with Sun TV watching for any slip, he was asked which country he most admired and referred to China.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China. Because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say we need to go green as fast as.
Trudeau runs the Liberal Party and has been running the Liberal Party from the beginning, even before he was Prime Minister, in a very similar way as China runs its entire nation. He does not tolerate dissent. He purges people that he disagrees with. He's all about internal policing until he can surround himself with a bunch of yes men that will do whatever he wants. Classic dictatorial moves. And by the way, even the goofy outfits, we've seen dictators do that before. So that's also in the category of potential dictator moves. Now, to give you an example of Trudeau's authoritarian leanings from the jump, there was a candidate early on in Trudeau's run called Andrew Leslie. This guy was an advisor to Justin Trudeau and essentially his hand-picked candidate to represent a certain slot. Now, there was a political rival of this person, for the same seat, also in the Liberal Party, also running for the same seat, and also somebody who had a legitimate chance to at least compete, if not win this seat, even without Justin Trudeau's backing. Now, what ended up happening in this race? Did they have basically the Canadian equivalent of a primary, and this guy ultimately came out on top, and therefore Justin Trudeau got his preferred candidate? No, what happened is Trudeau got members of his Liberal Party to disqualify the other candidate so his handpicked person could run unopposed. When this other candidate became angry and actually went to a public meeting in order to argue that what happened to him was incredibly undemocratic and incredibly unfair, and basically this guy was being picked because he was a Trudeau yes-man, the police were called and they needed to get rid of this other guy. So from the jump, Justin Trudeau has been using police power to his political benefit because that's the kind of person that he is. So it's not surprising what we're seeing now, because that's something that he would do to a politician within his own party. Imagine if you dare disagree with him on policy and you're just a dirty, stinking pleb that Justin Trudeau doesn't respect because your job is as lowly as driving a truck. And by the way, this wasn't a one-off thing for Justin Trudeau. Back then, in the beginning of his administration, he was doing all sorts of dirty tricks to disqualify about a half a dozen candidates for various arbitrary reasons. Now, of course, he used the technique of basically kicking people out of the party that were competing with Trudeau loyalists, basic dictator move, but he also did other crazy administrative tricks in order to get his competition, or the competition to his loyalists, out of the picture. They would change registration dates, they would change all kinds of rules, and basically rig and cut every single part of the process in favor of Justin Trudeau's preferred candidates until all opposition was purged from the Liberal Party. He would also expel people from Canada's Senate without consulting the Liberal leaders of the Senate. This is a big no-no in terms of actual decorum in terms of the Senate, as it would be in the United States of America, but he did it anyway because Trudeau is all about asserting his own dominance. He was setting up the seeds for his takeover of Canada that we're seeing right now, all the way back in the beginning of his administration, and people weren't covering it properly. People weren't talking about it. People kept talking about how Trudeau was like, you know, we're gonna have 50% women because it's current year. People were talking about how Trudeau was obsessed with proportional representation, diversity in his team, and they were making fun of him. Meanwhile, they didn't realize that Trudeau was stacking the deck in his favor, full of loyalists, so he could basically run a dissent-free party on his way to running a dissent-free dictatorship in the state of Canada. Now, election meddling is one thing. I'm sure that's happened with other candidates. I'm sure that's happened in other parliamentary systems. But Trudeau actually did this post people getting elected as a method of purging people out of the party so he can still have a better grip, even if these people were winning seats in Canada. So at one point, Justin Trudeau declared that all the MPs in his party were required to vote pro-choice under the consequences of them being purged from the political party. Now, Trudeau promised at the time that he would grandfather in some older MPs, some established power sets, and he wouldn't be enforcing this against them retroactively. Don't worry about it. We got you. If you don't agree, but you've been here for a long time, you've been a party loyalist, Trudeau is not going to hold you based on this one issue and throw you out of the party if you don't comply. Except that's exactly what he did. He went back on this grandfather clause in order to better tighten his grip. Because this wasn't about the issues. This wasn't about the policy. This was about forcing people to show loyalty to Justin Trudeau. And all of these edicts were about finding and uncovering people who were disloyal, potential threats to him, so he could better tighten his grip on the political party. This is why he survived that scandal with the contracting company where he ended up throwing the native that he had in his cabinet under the bus, because everybody in the Trudeau administration is a Trudeau loyalist, so when this one person broke from the pact, they were able to isolate and destroy her. This was the strategy for him all along.
Now, as we've been discussing this morning, it is the financial provisions of this Emergencies Act that are particularly concerning to many. The federal government is saying banks have already started to freeze the accounts of people involved in the protests, and they are warning there will be dire financial consequences to come.
So is it any surprise that somebody like this, somebody who systematically eradicated dissent within his own party, would react in the way that Justin Trudeau is reacting to the trucker convoys in his nation? Obviously not. This could be seen coming from a mile away. And one of the things that I want to highlight is a clip from Bill Maher, because he talked about it and it's actually gone viral recently, where he goes over some of the outrageous things Justin Trudeau said, and people got mad at him on the left because they love authoritarianism as long as it's left wing. And we just gotta go over it because it's actually from the same exact episode to show you how much of a mixed bag Maher is, as the video that I previously did where he said those ridiculous things about Whoopi Goldberg. Click the iCard if you want to check that out.
Justin Trudeau. What? You're laughing, but Justin Trudeau, I mean, I thought he was kind of a cool guy. Then I started to read what he said. This is a couple of weeks ago. He was, or maybe this is September, but he was talking about people who are not vaccinated. He said they don't believe in science. They're often misogynistic, often racist. No, they're not.
That was not smart of him at all.
Right. He said, but they take up space. And with that, we have to make a choice in terms of a leader as a country. Do we tolerate these people? It's like, tolerate these? Now you do sound like Hitler.
That was...
And recently he talked about them holding unacceptable views.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear that Trudeau said those things.
You didn't see the blackface? I mean, no, I'm kidding about that. I'm not. I mean, that was not a good look for him.
No,
but I mean, come on. I mean, that's, I think, what gets under people's skin.
Look, let's be honest. That is the talk of dictators. If you want to get mad because Bill Maher compared him to Hitler and Godwin's law and all that, that's whatever, but this guy is targeting and was targeting these unvaccinated people and talking about how society should no longer tolerate them, they should shun them because they don't align with Justin Trudeau's agenda. This was all the way back in September because Trudeau has no problems expressing his absolute hatred and vitriol for his own citizens as long as they don't align with him, because Trudeau thinks he's better than his own citizens. And that clip about them holding unacceptable views, we've gone over it before, but I'll play it again just so you can hear it from the horse's mouth himself.
Small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing.
This is basic dictator stuff. It is clear and obvious, and Trudeau can try to smear these people as evil racists and white supremacists all he wants, but the facts are he is the authoritarian in here. He is the person who is the problem. He is the person who needs to be removed from office, but he's not going without a fight. Trudeau has invoked the Emergency Powers Act, something that has never been implemented in Canada.
We know that financial institutions are already moving to restrict access to both cash and cryptocurrency. That's another big thing here that we're watching as well. So the RCMP have been sharing information with these financial institutions on the protesters, their supporters, the organizers here, trying to sort of starve off or choke off access to money, which of course has now been funding this for some 3 weeks. And the government has cited terrorist fundraising laws, now directing financial institutions to target people who have perhaps donated. You were talking about that with David as well, that it's a little murky here, exactly how this is going to be applied to some people. Chrystia Freeland yesterday not saying how many accounts have been frozen, not saying whose accounts have been frozen, but certainly the threat is there looming for people who have been involved with all of this.
It is a piece of legislation that allows him to declare martial law, and yet we hear nothing from our progressive media, who always talked about how Trump was on the verge of becoming a dictator any day now, still waiting on Trump to become the dictator, as we see Trudeau actually doing it. On top of that, as a provision of these anti-terrorism statutes, the Trudeau administration has said that they will be freezing the bank accounts of not just people who participate in the protests, but they've actually left it incredibly ambiguous on whether or not they will be freezing the bank accounts of people who donated to the protests, people who agreed with the protests. So essentially, in the nation of Canada, a modern Western nation, a nation to our north that is supposed to be cut from a similar cloth to us, without any due process, if you hold the wrong beliefs and you act in any minor way to support that couple $100 donation, and remember the Give, Send, Go was leaked to the press, the Trudeau administration is claiming the authority to freeze your account. On top of that, all the crowdfunding sites henceforth will be registered with Canada's intelligence agency.
We also know that some of these crowdfunding sites, such as GoFundMe, are going to have to register with FinTrack, which is the government's financial intelligence unit.
We are broadening the scope of Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules so that they cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use.
So that they can better track down people who disagree with Justin Trudeau in order to freeze their bank accounts. These powers are not going away.
As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order. In doing so, they will be protected against civil liability for actions taken in good faith.
Now, Heather, there has been criticism of this because banks have essentially been directed not to have any sort of financial relationship with some of these protesters, which is going to make it very difficult for them to get access to bank accounts, to have a credit card, for example, which, of course, is pretty difficult to live this day and age without those sorts of things.
And Trudeau can say, oh, these people are fringe people. Most of the truckers are vaccinated, whatever. That doesn't really make a difference. He's essentially making the case that he could suspend your license, revoke your insurance, do all these different things to damage you, fine you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and freeze not only your bank accounts, but the bank accounts of anybody who associates with you, all without any due process, and that is not okay. And the Canadian press has actually said, you know, this is a little bit extreme, and the Canadian press sucks up to Trudeau because they're funded by Trudeau, the CBC. And even they were like, you know, this probably will have some consequences for the market, which I'm sure Trudeau will get them pulled off the air for saying that. Maybe he'll freeze their bank accounts for daring to step out of line. If you're giving any kind of positive coverage to the truckers, you're an enemy of the state and Trudeau will likely go after you. But it just goes to show you how the left doesn't care about authoritarianism. All they care about is them being the authoritarian. They want to be at the top, and Trudeau is a perfect example of this. Again, you can get your bank account seized by the state without any due process, and Trudeau implemented this via secret court hearing in Canada against the leaders of the protest.
There are reports this morning we would highlight in the Toronto Star exclusively that an Ottawa judge last night in a secret hearing has frozen the bank accounts and the digital wallets of some of the Convoy leaders. Now, what detail are we learning in that Star reporting?
That's right. So there was an in-camera hearing last night, which means that both the defendants in this case, so some of these organizers, didn't have much warning, and that there was no sort of public notice or public access to any of this.
Look, what's going on in Canada is serious. Trudeau was not kidding when he said he admired the Chinese system. He's essentially implementing a social credit system where you're entirely judged on your view of Justin Trudeau and his policies. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, you can show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social medias and support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about Trudeau becoming a dictator and the person who saw it coming. Till next time.